Hello, everyone. Let's just give a few seconds to colleagues to join, and then we'll start the webinar. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Thank you for joining this side event on financing solar at the last mile, perceived challenges, risks, and opportunities. My name is Luisa Bernal. I work with UNDP Finance Sector Hub, and I'm joining you today from Geneva. It's really my pleasure to welcome you to this event, which is jointly organized by UNDP and the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, in the context of the Thematic Forum for the High-Level Dialogue on Energy. This webinar seeks to facilitate the engagement of different stakeholders in conversations, in much broader conversations on the challenges and opportunities for accelerating the alignment of finance to the SDGs, and hopes to build the momentum towards the 5th edition of UNDP SDG Finance Geneva Summit, which will take place in Geneva in December this year. The SDG Finance Geneva Summit is a platform that was created by UNDP in 2016 to foster a stronger engagement of the private sector with the 2030 agenda and advocate for SDG financing. The summit gathers every year close to 300 decision makers across the financial, business, and development communities to advance knowledge, to create a space for cross-sectoral networking, and facilitate partnership for the implementation of the SDGs. Within this overall objective, the event or the summit also seeks to showcase and facilitate the sourcing of SDG innovations developed by enterprises in developing countries that are both commercially successful and have a positive social and environmental impact. To do this, UNDP launched in 2019 a selection process of growth stage impact ventures, what we call the GSIV. And through this selection process, we seek to identify enterprises from developing countries that have developed at scale products and services that contribute to the SDGs while achieving commercial success. We seek for enterprises with proven impact, demonstrated product market fit, and financial sustainable models, or that have raised already at least one round of investments. This year, the selection covered enterprises operating across 3 different thematic areas, including on affordable and clean energy. 4 finalists from this category were selected from Guatemala, Mexico, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. 3 of them actually work on decentralized renewable energy companies or models that provide access to energy services at low cost to low-income and remote communities operating with innovative pay-as-you-go business models. The Ministerial Forum has been, therefore, a great occasion to highlight the importance of accelerating the transition of finance to bring this centralized solution to scale where it matters the most, in those countries where access remains a major challenge. I hope for a very fruitful discussion today that will contribute to further the understanding and awareness raising across the business, financial, and development communities on what are the challenges as of today, as well as many opportunities ahead for transitioning financing towards decentralized renewable energy from the current impact investment community towards more mainstream finance. We have a fantastic panel this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, which combines financial sector as well as industry representative, including one of the GSIV finalists that will present the perspective of the entrepreneur in the challenges and opportunities that they see in accessing finance. I'm delighted now to give the floor to Mr. Amjad Abdullah, who will set the scene for our webinar. Mr. Abdullah is head of partnership at IRENA and has an extensive experience in multilateral negotiations. He previously served as Director General of Climate Change and Multidisciplinary Team Leader at the Ministry of Environment of the Maldives. I'm delighted to invite Mr. Abdullah to take the floor and set the scene for our webinar. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Luisa. A very good evening from the headquarters of IRENA in Abu Dhabi, and a very good afternoon and a very good morning, depending on where you're. As you correctly said, my name is Amjad Abdullah. I'm the head of the partnerships at the International Renewable Energy Agency. It is my pleasure to speak at this important event on financing solar at the last mile, perceived challenges, risks, and opportunities, and to present some of the work that IRENA is currently undertaking in the energy access sphere that should be of paramount importance for you and interest here. First slide, please. IRENA has always positioned that decentralized renewable energy solutions are one of the key components in eradicating poverty and achieving socio-economic development. And they're also an enabler to achieving numerous sustainable development goals, such as universal healthcare, education, food security, and achieving climate goals. They also contribute to the attainment of the gender parity as well as improving livelihoods. Next slide, please. IRENA strives to accelerate the deployment of decentralized renewable energy solutions for the achievement of SDG 7, which is a key enabler for several SDG goals. Obviously, this slide provides a brief overview of the work that the agency is currently undertaking in this field, from energizing primary healthcare facilities across sub-Saharan Africa and small island developing states, to assessing the technical and economic viability of decentralized renewables across food value chains, to promoting entrepreneurship in the off-grid space. IRENA is pursuing partnerships to promote energy access in various end-use sectors. Lastly, IRENA hosts one of the most important platforms for stakeholders from the off-grid renewable energy space to discuss, share their ideas and best practices. The 5th edition of the International Off-Grid Renewable Energy Conference, IOREC, will take place in the latter part of this year, and we look forward to engaging with you all. Allow me now to present the agency's work in a greater detail on a few points described above. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, IRENA is also an active in the promotion of decentralized renewable energy solutions in agri-food value chains. As a first assessment of its kind, IRENA, in partnership with International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and having supported from Selco Foundation in pursuing a detailed viability assessment of deploying decentralized renewable energy solutions in agri-food value chains of the mountain communities in the Hindu-Kush-Himalayan region in 4 high-impact value chains: buckwheat, yuck, potatoes, and vegetables. The techno-economic analysis on viability of the decentralized renewable energy solutions in different nodal points of the identified value chains has explored solutions to energize the value chain that can improve and land use, yield, production, processing, storage, and transportation in all value chains. The payback period of the deployment of decentralized renewable energy solutions across different nodal points of the identified value chain is expected to range from 3 to 9 years. Next, please. In healthcare, off-grid renewable energy solutions are the most cost-effective solutions to provide electricity in rural health clinics situated in the most remote areas, far from the main grid. Despite electricity being central to the proper functioning of the healthcare facilities, almost 1 billion globally rely on health facilities with inadequate power. Working with both energy and health ministries in Burkina Faso, IRENA is currently undertaking an assessment of the overall energy needs of rural health centers and identifying energy gaps to recommend renewables-based technical solutions and robust delivery models. In the light of the increasing interest from its members, the agency is now expanding this work stream to additional countries. The outcome of these assessments in health, food, and other end use is to make available the necessary information, investment needs, and analyze solutions to inform decision-making, both for policymakers and potential investors, and clearly making entry points for the private sector. Next, please. IRENA also provides a platform for off-grid renewable energy actors to exchange ideas and provide examples of best practice. This is mainly done through its flagship International Off-Grid Renewable Energy Conference and exhibition. The event includes a special focus on the nexus between energy access and other key priorities. Furthermore, investors, practitioners, and entrepreneurs are given the opportunity to showcase their products and services in the exhibition. Next, please. IRENA is also providing assistance to local entrepreneurs in the off-grid renewable energy space through business management, operations, and project proposal refinement. Initiatives such as the ECOWAS Renewable Energy Entrepreneurship Support Facility pave the way for this type of assistance, and this model is now being replicated in sub-Saharan African region in partnership with SACRI and with a specific focus on youth promotion and gender mainstreaming. Through the West African facility, 90 renewable energy entrepreneurs were supported, and over $1 million of debt financing was mobilized as a result of improved venture bankability. Currently, over 100 applications have been received under the 2 calls for proposals for the Southern African facility. Next, please. Finally, I believe I should give a special mention to IRENA's work on project facilitation and bankability. Also, in the energy access space, the Climate Investment Platform announced during the Climate Action Summit in 2019 is a joint initiative of IRENA, UNDP, SE4, in cooperation with the GCF through CIP. IRENA and its partners aim to support the development of renewable energy projects by boosting investments, facilitating access to finance, and providing de-risking solutions. Next, please. There are currently 218 registered projects totaling 470 megawatt and estimated at a combined value of $1.1 billion on the Climate Investment Platform. Among these, 84 are categorized as small-scale energy access projects, with around 73 of them privately and community-owned. Ladies and gentlemen, the importance of energy access cannot be underestimated to aid the international community reach its climate goals, lift millions of people out of poverty, and help many millions more to substantially improve their livelihoods. Was IRENA intends to pursue its efforts in this sphere with continuous vigor. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullah, for this presentation. I think this has given us an overview of the important enabler role of energy for the SDG as a whole, as you show access to health, access to productive capacity in agriculture sector, which are so critical for livelihoods for poor communities. And thank you so much also for illustrating some of the activities and tools that you and partners have put in place to facilitate precisely access to the last mile on energy services. So it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Eduardo Aplejar, who will be the moderator of our session this afternoon. Eduardo is project coordinator of Climate Aggregation Platform and UNDP. He's an expert in financial mechanism to scale up investment in small-scale energy assets. And without further ado, Eduardo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much to all.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can all hear me well. And thank you for the very good presentation from Irina. Basically, today we have a great panel, quite a diverse panel, I should say. And if you look at the title of the session, we're trying to identify what are the challenges, the risks and opportunities in financing solar at the last mile. And I think this panel gives us the opportunity to look at this question from different angles, from players and actors at different levels of the value chain. We have investors, impact investors, both in equity and debt, a financial intermediary, an entrepreneur, an industry association that really is the voice of the off-grid solar sector. And we also have an organization, an initiative that's developing an innovative means of accessing climate finance and additional investment for the sector. So I think this is a great panel. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker from this panel, which is Mr. Loïc Fontaubert, who is investment director at NG Rassembleur d'Énergie, a corporate investment fund that promotes access to sustainable energy for all through direct investment in enterprises, providing sustainable and adapted energy access solutions to poor and remote populations. The floor is yours, Mr. Fontaubert.
Yes, hello. I'm delighted to be here this evening amidst participants that I know and appreciate. I happen to know some of you. NG Rassembleur d'Énergie is an impact investor with an industrial background. It all started 10 years ago when leading utility decided to extend its reach to deprive customers it couldn't serve. At that time, NG was one of the few with utility with operations outside its domestic market. However, it didn't reach direct customers outside of business customers. And therefore, we decided to set up this investment fund whose goal was clearly described earlier. So it took us time to understand first the needs of the population and who were the entrepreneurs who were serving these populations. However, thanks to continuous efforts and to interest of NG employees who have been very helpful in identifying them, we learned to meet the entrepreneurs, and luckily enough, some of them are here tonight. Ilu Mexico was one of them. I don't know if they'll be here, but Kingo, you will hear later on. Now, if I may, could you just move on to next slide, please? How it all started and how did we get there? First, there were two hurdles. One was a technical hurdle. As a large energy company, our conviction, or NG's conviction, was that you could reach people only by putting more electrons and extending the grid. To make a long story short, though, it's not exactly the thing. So we had to convince our investment committee that decentralized solutions could be appropriate solution. And second, how we first had to get this conviction, but through a direct field visit, it was easy to convince them. And I would say the second barrier to get there is to understand the business model, or basically how to get people with no credit history to pay on installments in galloping inflation economies. Pay-go solutions as a technical solution was a game changer to address this issue, because it both provides way to lock the systems when customers are not paying, and also it enables you to collect valuable data that will then be necessary in the process to attract credit investors that will need to finance the deployment of the solutions. However, I mean, pay-go solutions are great. They're not the only one. And I know that there is this company active in Sierra Leone who has been able to reach the same objective by appropriate process. And I'm referring to our Easy Solar friends. Now, what comes next? Who will take over once impact investors will move out of this financing this business? There are two characteristics for impact investors. One of them is that they are eager to take risk, and that's great. The second one is that they don't have deep pockets. So we're here to participate in seed, Series A, Series B, maybe Series C, but still there are lots of DRE companies that will still require additional equity injection after this. Who is likely to take over? I don't have any obvious answer to this. However, DFIs might be an interesting partner to deal with. However, and I think it's worth mentioning that DFIs are quite sensitive about geographies where they invest. And tax haven might freak them out of this business. So think twice before registering in tax haven. Then infrastructure funds have shown some interest in Africa, but our experience is that they seem to be really focused on companies that have reached operating profitability. So this points out where we have to work on. Now, second thing is, what about fourth? What about other ventures? Unfortunately for late investors, the pioneers of the off-grid have been around for quite a while, and it might be harder to identify unicorns with startup valuation, which is a key issue too. However, the good news is that the early movers paved the way to unlocking access to credits, to affordable credit. And on top of that, this sector will be needing tens of billions of dollars in the coming 30 years. What about tougher geography? Who can invest there? I don't have a clear view, and we know we are limited as even a corporate investors, but I understand funds that are backed by World Bank and DFIs or siblings can be a solution. Now, how about how to move on, or how do we exit? When we launched the fund 10 years ago, we're anticipating a 7-year average duration of investment. In some very few cases, we managed to beat this objective, but we still haven't found the magic formula. Before the crisis, I would have said that partial exits might be a way to trigger and to start exiting. Unfortunately, then came the COVID crisis that somehow challenged this attempt. So I would say, how could we characterize it? I would say work in progress. So I have no other solution. Then I would like to have a few words about the crisis we are deeply in. As regards our portfolio, and probably most of the companies, you know it, there were surprising first lessons that we learned. First, field teams adapted nimbly to the situation. Some even took advantage of delivering essential goods to keep operating when competitors had to stop due to lockdown. Second, due to the nature of their business model, runway was surprisingly extended rather than reduced, with reduced activity. And shareholders swiftly provided what support they could bring, either through moratorium on loan or even providing additional shareholder loans. So these were the promising signals, but unfortunately, we're only in the middle of this crisis. Now, we all know the crisis is here to stay, at least in 2021, and the situation can even worsen in emerging economies. So we now need new investors to come on and take over. Of course, we will need to rebase our valuation, and that's not an easy task we have to go through. And we also badly need lenders to revise their terms and still be part of the game. It's more than ever essential that they can remain committed to the business as equity investors are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Loic, for this insightful presentation. I will move on to the next speaker, who is Jose Ordóñez, who is the CEO of Kingo Energy, which is a company that provides decentralized solar energy services to families and businesses in off-grid villages across the globe. Jose has extensive experience as well as an investor in private equity and venture capital, and also as a senior investment banker. He was part of was a lead investor in the Kingo Series C equity round. So he can provide some insights from both sides, I think. The floor is yours, Jose.
Thank you, Eduardo. Let me share my screen. Just give me a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. So thank you for the invitation. Kingo Energy, as it says here, our mission is to turn lives on. We are the first mover in PAYGO in Latin America. We're also the leading player right now. We design and manufacture our own technology, and we're also a pioneer in a growing tech impact ecosystem that has developed in Guatemala that is very much aimed at solving typical developing country problems through technology. So thank you very much. And we're also a finalist in the GSIV process. So thank you for the invitation. So Kingo's business model has evolved over the past 8 years. We started out initially as a direct sale model, essentially not with our own technology at the time, but we were essentially trying to sell equipment from third parties in the Guatemalan market. Now, at the time, this is 8 years ago, the equipment, it was a 10-watt system, cost around $250, which was a lot of money for people living off grid. So we decided, well, we're going to try a financing model with microfinance entities. Well, it turned out that $250 was too little money for an MFI when compared to the sort of credit analysis and due diligence that needed to be done with people living, very far away. So we didn't sell too many systems. So then we decided to pivot. We developed our own technology, very much focused on pay-as-you-go, but with a twist. We decided to become essentially a distributed utility where we would retain ownership of the assets. We would install them in the homes of the end customers, and we would collect a monthly fee, basically, with providing an evergreen warranty on the system. So anything broke down over the life of the customer relationship, the customer then could return the equipment and we would swap it. So that led us then to develop a number of very interesting technologies having to do with prepay, with encryption to prevent hacks and the like. And the basic system was, very similar to the ones that have been used elsewhere in PAYGO. Very basic 15-watt system that can power 3 LED light bulbs, that has a USB port to charge a cell phone, which, as many of you know, is one of the big expenses that people have living off grid. So that's how we evolved. We got to we reached about 60,000 customers in Guatemala and Colombia, raised capital from venture capital investors and lenders, and which I'll talk about further on. But then over the last couple of years, what we've seen in the Latin American market is that governments that have, all the governments in the region have rural electrification mandates. The typical solution has been to extend the grid. However, there's still in many countries like Guatemala and Colombia where we operate, there's still a good number of people where this solution is not practical because they live either in areas that are too remote or too dispersed with low population density, or at the end of the day, too poor, where their consumption levels will be extremely low, that in the end, it just doesn't make sense to extend the grid. So a number of these governments are creating funds to provide electrification through standalone home systems. So this trend led us to develop a whole new suite of products, much bigger systems, ranging from, for governments, from 300 watts to over 1,000 watts, which now can even power a school. Our 1,000-watt systems, which we're deploying in Guatemala, can power 20 laptops, a widescreen TV, and hardware for essentially remote education. So the business model with that has also evolved, whereas before in the B2C, it was essentially, dealing with small customers that would pay on a weekly or monthly basis. Now with governments, we're looking at essentially PPA-like agreements that can last 10 years or more. So we've raised quite a bit of capital in so far equity. We're in our C round right now. So far we've raised around 45 million. We're in the middle of our C round. That is a 32 million round. We've raised about 20 of that. We have 12 to go. But the idea is that this new round will fund our growth, particularly as we enter the B2G business. And as you can see, we have a pretty institutional. We have a pretty institutional cap table. ENGIE is one of our key shareholders in our Series B. But what we discovered, and as I said before, we were one of the pioneers in developing the tech venture ecosystem in Guatemala and Central America. It's been a process really that starts with local family offices. Then you start seeing some DFIs, as Loic said before, and then as you move up in the series, you start seeing more and more first corporate venture funds or corporate impact funds. And I think in the future, we expect to see sort of regular VC or private equity investors as we move up. On the debt side, we've raised about $12 million from a combination of impact debt funds and DFIs. So as I said before, we're currently in the middle of our Series C. It's a 32 million round. We've raised 20 of that. It's sort of the structure is very much a plain vanilla Series C venture capital that has sort of your typical distribution preferences, exit rights, and the like. And the idea is the use of proceeds will be to fund our entry into the B2G vertical, and also to grow our operations in a number of countries. So along the way, we've learned a number of lessons, both operational and financial. One of the key things that we've learned is that bigger is not necessarily better, particularly when you're in the B2C vertical. So what you find is that in many cases, reaching more and more customers becomes more and more expensive. The cost of acquiring that customer that is more and more remote and in less and less dense populations may be larger than the lifetime customer value of that customer. So therefore, it's very important, and this is something that we've learned along the way, to first of all focus on critical mass, focus on regions and customers that can provide a significant ARPU for a reasonable cost of servicing that customer. Also, when you're in a utility model like ours, having reliable equipment out in the field is crucial because OpEx is very significant, and therefore what you want to do is minimize the maintenance that you have to provide, especially out in the field. Having to actually visit a customer to provide maintenance to the equipment is very, very expensive. And finally, involve the community. So you want to try to mutualize the responsibility over the care of the equipment and for payment. And ultimately, this means less OpEx, higher ARPU. On the financial side, we've learned that DFIs do play a catalytic role, but you can also fall into certain perverse incentives, which often they can put growth targets that are ultimately not sustainable from an economic point of view. So you have to balance the need for capital and for growth with disciplined growth. I think that's a very key thing. Also, the B2C business model really has low debt capacity. At the end of the day, the revenues, the ARPU from B2C customers is inherently unpredictable. You have people with low incomes, with non-recurring incomes, and therefore this doesn't really allow for high levels of debt. So this is something to keep in mind. Then impact debt, you have to be careful with impact debt. It may be, you may fall into the trap of raising it too quickly, too soon in the life of the company, and also because you're learning, because you're, there's not a lot of data in these markets. You're building it as you go along. You may raise too much debt for the actual ability of the company to support it. So these are, again, important lessons that you need to know. With the other more sort of, with the B2B and B2G, that really changes the game completely, because now you're dealing with more predictable revenues, with contracted revenues that you can then finance through the sort of traditional means that renewable projects are financed through project finance and the like. So, we've had an evolution of our business. We think we have some very, very attractive growth prospects over time, and sort of glad to share our experiences. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. I'll go ahead with presenting our next speaker, who is Ron Bors, who is the global project. She works for the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association as project manager, access to finance. She is primarily involved in the PAYGO Perform program to help constructing a KPI framework for the off-grid solar industry, and she can tell us more about this work. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you and the P team for organizing this great webinar. So my name is Ron Bors. I'm a project manager, access to finance at Kokla. And through my role, I aim to increase the chances for OJS companies to attract financing. Today I would like to talk a little bit around the standards and guidelines that Kokla has curated, sometimes also together with partners and maintains those at the moment, that are aimed at really enhancing the performance of companies whilst also de-risking the sector. So I'd like to start off with also last year, of course, it has been a very eventful year for the off-grid solar sector. There has been the COVID pandemic, but there has also been a lot of changes in macroeconomic factors, as well as there have been changes in political environment, and as well just generally market environment in the OJS sector. But despite all those challenges, the OJS sector has still managed to attract about 316 million in capital, which indicates that current investors are behind the sector and are still motivated to invest in a sector and really stay with OGS companies through this journey. But of course, it has been lucky enough to attract these robust investments. But yeah, investment is a bit of a lagging indicator, so we don't know what will happen with the year to come. And in general, we do have a long road in front of us where we need to reach to a situation where we will attract about 1.1 billion annually to be able to reach SDG 7, which means 3 times the current volume. So for Gogla, how we think about it is that the drivers for the future investment flows can be separated into one, more the company drivers, which is around the business capacity, profitability and growth, as well as impact. And then the investor drivers, which is more around awareness, understanding the sector, having the insights to be able to invest in the space, as well as potentially new or different financial instruments that are more suiting to invest in OGS companies. Gogla aims to do that through first curating standards and guidelines that can allow the industry as well to harmonize around these standards that companies can also report upon, which can then enable more transparency in the market, more market trends and insights. And lastly, Gogla also encourages the sector to specialize and promote partnerships in the sector. Currently, Gogla has about 4 standards and guidelines, which is around more the financial and operational performance of companies, impact metrics, product quality, as well as consumer protection, and aims to also create some standards around circularity, e-waste, and interoperable systems. Through those standards, we hope to promote improved performance industry, also create a common language, facilitate market intelligence, and also, as I was also talking about beforehand, more facilitate professionalization and specialization within the industry. One of those standards is pay go perform. Back then, and what also still holds true today, is that fundraising is challenging for companies still today, depending on the investor group, but investors don't fully understand of their solar businesses and how to analyze them, how to invest in them. And because of all that, perception of risk is also high, and we're lacking of that information to really promote the sector neutrally and with fact that is fact-based. There's also no current ways in certain areas to benchmark, which then makes it difficult for companies to understand how they're performing, how to improve themselves, but also for investors to understand which companies are performing better than the others, and to also do benchmarking with their own portfolio. So that's why, together with IFC and CGAP, we initiated Pay Go Perform to then enable those companies to improve the operations based upon learnings from benchmarking, to enhance the transparency in the market, to then enable the investor to understand it better, enhance sector insights, as well as increase a flow of investments, and also more, making sure that the capital is also going to the right company. All in all, hopefully accelerating achieving SDG 7. Long term, we'd like to work towards implementing a reporting mechanism that will allow the industry stakeholders to assess how companies are performing on a financial and operational level. So how were these KPIs created? This was a very open and transparent process where we had about 600 individuals involved, and we're working very closely with about 60 plus investment firms, bigger companies, and other firms such as consulting firms or industry specialists. With those stakeholders, we had various meetings over about 6 months. We also did a pilot with 8 companies that were representative of the industry. All in all, it was very open to everyone, and we, together with the industry, made KPIs for the industry. So all in all, there was really a joint ownership of those KPIs. So the end product was about 3 categories of KPIs, amounting to 36 KPIs in total, covering company and operational indicators, portfolio quality, as well as unit economics. The company indicators is really about understanding the context of a company, understanding its business model, how it works, what the position is, and as well, maybe typical financial needs. And it will also allow for more benchmarking, so splitting unit economics, for example, by business model or distribution model. Then you also have another group of KPIs, which is around more portfolio quality. This is around understanding the magnitude and also types of risk that the company takes on, and also how it manages those over time. This is especially important for example, debt investors that want to understand how risky the investment is. Then you have, lastly, the unit economics KPIs, which is really about understanding the economics of a company and the sustainability, the profitability, and also understanding how a company may evolve over time. This is, of course, for both investors very, very important, but especially for us equity investors that want to assess how a company might be in about 5 years' time. Then the pay-conform KPIs can be used across multiple use cases. This is first and mostly also for the companies, implement them to then assess how they're performing, and then also understand where they can improve and how they can do that. Then it can also support from the moment that a company reaches out to an investor all the way to once the investment is made and the investment can be monitored. And lastly, it's also around the market intelligence that was also talking about in the beginning. So if you would like to hear more, please do join us also for the webinar where we will launch all of these KPIs and we'll go through them more a little bit in depth. Also offer insights on how companies and as well as investors and other stakeholders can use those KPIs into more kind of their day-to-day and decision-making. And we'll also have a bit of a discussion around tools and as well the value of those KPIs to different stakeholders in the industry. So that was me for now. If in the meantime you have some questions or about the pay-conform KPIs or more generally around the program at Gogla, please do reach out. My contact information is on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, for the very good presentation of Gogla's work in this space. I'll present the next speaker, who is Surabhi Visser, who is the head of investments at Sunfunder, one of the lead debt financing providers in the off-grid solar space. The floor is yours, Surabhi.
Thank you, Eduardo. Give me 1 second. Not the most tech savvy, so just bear with me. Hopefully this works. You can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion. As Eduardo said, I'm Surabhi. I'm the head of investments at Sunfunder. Sunfunder is a debt fund manager or a financial intermediary, which means we borrow money from a variety of institutions and we on-lend that money to companies that are active in Africa and Asia, primarily working in the solar storage and energy efficiency space. To date, I'm sorry, I have to give you the quick intro, but to date, we've provided over $140 million worth of loans to 56 companies across 23 countries. This has resulted in 8 million people at least having improved access to energy. But we recognize that this is quite small in terms of the amount of work that is still left to be done. Our goal is by the end of this decade, so by 2030, we'll have catalyzed over 1 gigaton of GHG reductions, as well as improved access to energy for over 100 million people. Here we go. And we are based in Nairobi with team members in London and Paris as well. And what's really important for us is that our team is actually representative of the markets that we are working in. And I'll get to why that's important. When I'm talking to clients, I always say that if there's solar in there, that we'll look at it. And so we've provided financing to companies and projects across the solar spectrum. So being as small as smaller solar home systems, mini grids, and as you can see, C&I solar, telco, and finally agri-solar, which is things like solar powered cold storage and solar powered irrigation. And I think the fun thing about the work that we do is that we get to be at the forefront of innovation. We come in after organizations like Loïc's, but we're there to help companies scale. That being said, there are certain challenges that still persist that we've had to navigate. whilst we know that there is plenty of capital in the space, the question is it the right capital? Does the capital itself understand what the market requires? Is it tailored for it? You know, if capital takes the most traditional route, it would be very costly considering the ticket sizes that are involved with some of these younger companies. Or if we were to price the risk the way investors perceive the risk, you know, that would actually end up having a perverse effect. And what I mean by that is that if I price my loan to a company such as Kingo, for example, at a very high rate, rather than absorbing that cost, what will ultimately happen is that price is passed on to the end user in terms of the cost of the unit. And that makes it less affordable. And that's exactly what we're trying not to achieve. We want to make sure we increase access to those products. I think the second is actually identifying bankable pipeline. And that's, you know, again, if all the companies in this space were EBITDA positive and had been operating for a number of years, you know, I frankly wouldn't have a job. The challenge is that, you know, this is still a nascent market, even though it's been around for, let's say, at least a decade. And it is important to be able to understand the local context, what is actually happening on the ground. And that's why it's important for us that our team is from all four corners of the continent. And then finally, again, if we take a traditional route, and I'm sure some of the players on this call have experienced this, is that as soon as you bring in a number of external advisors to help structure your transaction, it takes a long time, which is costly from an equity perspective. And then it just costs a lot to have a lot of outside players involved or third-party players involved. So how have we been able to navigate it? And I should caveat this, that again, this is still a challenge that we continue to face, but we've managed to have some success with. So in the interest of time, I'll just focus on the SET fund, which is the fund that we're currently deploying. Here we've had two key things that have worked really well for us. One is using blended finance. And what I mean by blended finance, it's having a junior layer that's concessional debt that helps provide a risk buffer to the senior debt. What was really catalytic in our fund was that both DFC and SWED fund did something that was rather unusual for the DFIs, and that is actually coming in at a junior layer. And just in terms of impact, every dollar of junior catalyzes $5 of senior debt. It's something that we want to do in our next fund that is a $500 million fund. So as much as Loic and Rowan were talking about not enough money in the space, we're hoping that this is a problem that we can solve by raising a larger fund. It is important that the DFIs and the impact investors in the space do take a more catalytic position. I think the second thing that was really important for us is the risk mitigation tools that are out there. DFC, again, a strong partner of ours, came in with political risk insurance, which is important in emerging markets. And then CETA came in with a portfolio guarantee, which has been incredibly important, again, given that this is still a young market, business models are still evolving, and especially during this COVID context, whilst, you know, companies have been able to adapt, there still have been concerns from the debt side. And with the guarantee, we've still been able to underwrite business. I mean, that being said, you know, once we are looking at the transactions, you know, our view, and I think a lot of the debt providers out there, the view is that in order for the impact to be sustainable, the business has to be sustainable. And so what we've done is we take traditional banking products and we adapt it for the business and we adapt it for the local context. The work that Gogla is doing and that Rowan has just described has been really critical in terms of understanding risk. Like, we've been doing a lot of that work in-house and we've built our own tools, but I think standardization is going to be a big boon to the sector and will hopefully catalyze a lot more capital coming into this space. But I think it's actually being on the ground, that local market expertise really helps in understanding the operational risks. The second is being pragmatic. Like, what is the most cost-effective approach? Where is where does the value really lie? We have in-house counsel and an in-house engineer that help us in conducting the due diligence. And our goal is truly to crowd in additional capital. We recognize that, we will hit our limits. We've syndicated over $30 million worth of transactions. We hope to do a lot more. We're working on a couple of mandates right now. And then hopefully with the next fund, we will be able to do a lot more. I think ultimately, this is a space that's going to continue to grow. The business models will continue to adapt. I think the capital is available. We just need to make sure that the capital matches what the market requires, and that we're able to scale this sector responsibly, because we know that it's needed. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. We can go ahead and move on to the next speaker, who is Paul Needham, who is a co-founder of Positive Capital Partners. And he's also the co-chair of the Distributed Renewable Energy Certificate, or DREC initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder industry-led initiative that is working to create a global market for distributed renewable energy certificates. And Paul can tell us more about what these are. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. The DREC initiative is an independent, private sector-led initiative that's creating a new mechanism and new incentives for global corporations and climate investors to invest in renewable energy in developing markets. The private sector is already leaning in on climate. Consider the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Over 1,500 companies worldwide are setting clearly defined commitments to reduce their emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. Consider also the RE100 movement, where global companies are committing to power their businesses with 100% renewable electricity. RE100 has over 300 members operating in 175 countries, generating demand for 315 terawatt hours per year. These are not empty pledges. These companies are committing to bold new targets, committing to action plans, and committing to report publicly on their progress. And they're making progress. Corporate renewable power purchase agreements increased 18% in 2020, despite the pandemic, totaling over 23 gigawatts of new power. When corporates purchase renewable power, they also acquire the renewable energy certificates, or RECs, so they can prove that their actions and investments caused new renewable energy to be generated and delivered. Global corporations also purchase RECs directly, providing additional predictable and bankable revenue streams to renewable energy projects. Often, it's these upfront purchase agreements for RECs that help de-risk the renewable energy project, help get it financed, and help get it built. Problem with this slide here, it's not showing up. There we go. Well, climate investors are also leading the way. Sustainable finance hit a new record in 2020 at $730 billion, 29% growth in an otherwise very difficult year. And since 2006, there's been over $1.7 trillion in social and sustainable bond issuances. Climate finance is growing and its growth is accelerating. The problem, of course, is that nearly all of those bold corporate actions on climate and nearly all of that climate finance is being deployed in developed countries. Not enough is being directed to assist the energy transition in emerging markets. And as you know, there are many practical challenges to mobilizing finance in the sector, as the other speakers have spoken about. Uncertain project revenues, foreign exchange risks, investing across borders, the challenge and high transaction costs of aggregating small projects and systems across into packages big enough and interesting enough to investors. But what a missed opportunity. Global corporations and climate investors could have much greater impact, both climate impact and social impact, by investing in distributed renewable energy projects in emerging markets. You see, the climate impact of any new renewable energy project really depends on where it's being built and the carbon intensity of the electricity or the energy that it's displacing. Adding new renewables to the European grid would displace, on average, 275 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. In the US, it would be 402 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour on average. Distributed renewable energy projects in Southern Africa that displace coal-fired electricity or small-scale diesel generators are achieving 3 to 6 times the climate impacts. Purely from a climate perspective, this is where we need to invest. And the case is even stronger when we consider the opportunities to advance climate justice. Our goal in establishing the DREC initiative is to build a link between SDG 13 and SDG 7, to build a link between bold climate action and the end of energy poverty. The initiative is doing 3 things to build that link. First, we're creating the DREC market instrument, a distributed renewable energy certificate that represents 1 megawatt hour of distributed renewable electricity. A DREC is proof, third-party verifiable proof, that a megawatt hour of clean power was generated and delivered. Second, we're building the open source DREC technology platform that will help DRE project developers monetize the positive environmental impacts of their projects. And third, we're working closely with companies and climate investors to help them invest in DRE projects as a strategy to meet their own climate goals. There are many possible use cases, and we're already exploring several opportunities to pilot the instrument. Our hope is that the DREC instrument could also help address many of the practical challenges in financing the end to energy poverty. Long-term purchase agreements from creditworthy buyers can help bring revenue certainty to DRE projects. The sale of DRECs to global buyers could provide new, hard currency revenue streams, mitigating some of the foreign exchange risks for global investors. The DREC platform will lower the transaction costs of aggregating large numbers of small systems and projects, and improved project economics combined with lower risks could help mobilize more domestic lending. None of this is proven, however. These are the working hypotheses informed through discussions over many months with multiple corporates, dozens of stakeholders and contributors. We have to make this happen together. The DREC initiative is a not-for-profit, multi-stakeholder, industry-led initiative to create a global market for distributed renewable energy. Together, we're designing, delivering, and demonstrating new ways to certify and value distributed renewable electricity attributes. I hope you'll get in touch. I hope you will get in touch, work with us to help build a new market, help connect Goal 13 to Goal 7, and help mobilize private sector investment towards the end of energy poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the speakers. Apologies to everyone, we're running a little bit late, and I hope you don't mind if we continue for a little bit longer, for another 10, perhaps 15 minutes to let the audience send us some of their questions. I would invite members of the audience to share their questions via the Q&A button on Zoom. If you've also shared your questions in the chat, we'll try to catch those questions as well. But I've seen some questions already in the Q&A box. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead. I will also ask the members of the audience to please limit your questions to questions that are of general interest. If you have some specific queries for individual speakers, you can contact them. They've shared some of their contact details. And I'm sure you'll be able to get more information specific to your questions. But without further ado, some of the questions we've received. One question for you, Paul, actually, regarding the DRECs. The person asking the questions finds the DREC instruments interesting. And the question from his side is, what would be the costs and the implications of implementing such DRECs and certificates in terms of monitoring, verification process, etc., and ensuring the readiness of project developers, etc., to be able to take on such a new instrument? How could these, what measures could be taken to address the limitations that this could lead to in terms of capacity?
Yeah, great question. In truth, we don't have all the answers yet, but I will say that if you are attempting to package your environmental attributes as carbon and monetize the verified emission reductions in that way, the transaction costs are very, very high. And each individual site needs to be visited. You need to establish a counterfactual story of what would have happened if the project hadn't gone ahead. Carbon certification is a very expensive process, too expensive, really. Very few companies in the DRE space have been able to effectively do that. The goal with the DREC initiative is to eliminate those costs and to automate as much of the verification process as possible. When corporates purchase RECs, they're not really, what they really need proof of is third-party verification that the energy was delivered. And most of us in the sector have already been deploying some kind of remote monitoring technology. Jose talked about that. We know that the Odyssey platform is doing a fantastic job of connecting mini grids. So there are many technology solutions already there. We're leveraging those and partnering with those organizations. But the goal is absolutely precisely that, to reduce the transaction costs for more automated monitoring and verification.
Thank you. And a very quick follow-up question on that from another member of the audience regarding when will DRECs be available for private companies?
Probably next year. We have a handful of corporates, large corporates that we're talking to right now that will be purchasing DRECs. And together with a number of partners, we're developing a few pilot projects. So please contact us if you're a corporate with a climate strategy and you're thinking about how you might integrate DRECs into your strategy, or contact us if you're a developer that is developing a project and wants to explore how to monetize DRECs, because we are developing some pilot projects now.
Thank you. Another question, perhaps this one could be for Gokula and some of the investors in this call. Are there tools or systems that can be used to measure these investments against the impact, including progress towards achieving the SDGs? Perhaps, Ron, you want to provide some insights from your side?
Yeah, so I quickly also insert a link in the chat. I think for Gogla, we have specifically also designed impact metrics for the sector that either investors but also companies can use to assess the impact that they make, covering different things, not only more specific to the ODS sector, so really the impact on jobs, on CO2, etc. For SDGs, I think you would have to look at more kind of general tools that are available, but I think it would be worth to have a look at the impact metrics of Gogla.
Thank you. A question, I think, for Loic that just came up, and I also had a question regarding that, and you mentioned it in your presentation, Loic. Whilst it is established that billions of dollars are needed for the off-grid space, but it seems that it seems there's some pessimistic views around exits in the space, and also based on your experience, there seem to be some challenges around the exits. We're talking about equity. Any additional thoughts on exit potentials in the industry? Like,
yeah, first, sorry for my video is out. Any other view? I mean, we've tried on with some of our investees to contract the exit rather successfully, though only at the beginning, like being bought out by the entrepreneur, which is, however surprising, is sometimes possible. But then, no, I'm afraid we don't yet have a realistic solution to it. We're working on it. Remaining committed to the company enables future investors to see that, to believe you're still committed. That's why partial exit is something we would like to further explore. But unfortunately, so far, we haven't achieved this.
Do you think that such challenges are also, I suppose they are faced by other early stage investors in this space? And do you think this has had an impact in terms of the availability of equity for more early stage or second, third generation of companies entering this sector?
No, not really, because what the experience we've had is that even those whom we know as co-investors in other deals that haven't had yet the opportunity to exit are still eager to invest in in third generation. So that is to say, those who are really committed will be here when we call upon them. Now, getting the more the merrier, I would say. We need to have even more impact investors on board. But hopefully, it seems there are more coming in. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you. And just a question.
Could I compliment Loic, since he's an investor in our company. So what he mentioned about contractually structuring the exit. So one of the things that we have at Kingo, for example, is that investors, after a certain number of years, can initiate a process themselves to start an exit. And also after a certain number of years, we have a cash sweep of any excess cash actually gets put into a reserve to take out the investor. So sort of a redemption fund. So this is a way for, since this is a new sector, this is a way for investors to kind of at least partially structure that exit.
Thank you for that additional comment. I don't know if there's anyone else in the panel that wishes to provide some insights on this front. And I may actually add another question, perhaps to you as well, Jose, on this front. If we look at the investment trends in this particular space, the investments have been fairly concentrated, both in terms of the number of recipients that have received the financing, but also in terms of geographies, in terms of a lot of the investments have gone to companies based in Sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa. As a CEO of a company that operates in some of these more frontier markets, how have you felt that has impacted your ability to fundraise? Well, I mean, you've been very successful from what we're seeing, but how have you experienced that?
Yeah, it's been a progression, as I said initially. First, you have to find believers in your own market. So we started out with local family offices that believed in the project, believed in what we were doing. Then we started moving toward DFIs that were betting on this emerging ecosystem that we had here. And then, as we gained more traction in our business, then we started going more institutional. But it is a new market. It is frontier. Most of the investment has gone to Africa. So yeah, it's been difficult, and we've had to essentially gain more and more traction over time.
Thank you. One quick question for Paul. Sorry, first of all, actually, I wanted to see if there's any comments on this particular point from Sunfunder.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to say, as much as all the capital, a significant amount of the capital has been coming to Sub-Saharan Africa as well as India, I do think we're seeing a shift to look at more of the broader global South, whether that's Southeast Asia or Latin America. I think Kingo is a name that we've heard for a very long time as well. So it is a company that we've been tracking. And as much as I think there was a holdback on capital last year, particularly with COVID, and everybody wanted to see how their companies would weather the storm. And, as I do believe we are in the middle of the storm right now, the light isn't there at the end of the tunnel just yet. What we found is that the investors, both equity and debt, are still there to support the companies. And the question is what is the best way? How do we continue to do this in terms of whether it's relaxing terms, giving more grace periods, whatever it can be? We want to continue to support the sector. And it's not just, the headline companies that we've heard about over the number of years. I think the second and third generation companies are still attracting capital, and primarily because they get to learn the lessons from the first generation companies. And we're seeing that in their business models, and that they're ramping up much more quickly. So just to say that the money is still coming.
Thank you for that. There's a few questions that came up for the DREX initiative. I suggest that for the members of the audience, I suggest we can post on, if it hasn't already been done, if we could post the website of the DREC initiative actually on the chat. I think a lot of the answers to your questions might be there, by the way. But there's a few questions. I won't be able to cover them all, and we are running out of time. There's one question in particular that is regarding who could access these DRECs. Could governments and electrification programs for health facilities, schools, etc., also access DRECs? Any comments on that, Paul?
Yes, absolutely. This is really why we've been driving a multi-stakeholder process, is to discover the different applications. Like a carbon credit can be used in so many different contexts, so too should the DREC enable many different types of new transactions.
Thank you. I think on that note, apologies for anyone that submitted additional questions. I think we are running out of time here. I wanted to just provide a quick overview of what we discussed, some of the key takeaway points. I think that each of the members of this panel came in from a different perspective. I think we've seen the perspective from a company that is fundraising in a frontier market, and their lessons learned from the process. I think some of the key takeaway, perhaps one of the key takeaway points from their side, is that you need to find a balance between the need for capital and growth and disciplined growth. And that is also linked to the need for ensuring that the sector can demonstrate profitability, and that it can demonstrate that it is performing adequately. And I think that brings us to the work that Gokula is doing on the standardized performance indicators, and developing a variety of performance standards on a variety of areas of these businesses. And these could hopefully help unlock some additional financing from the space, help investors better understand the space, benchmark companies' performance, and this could hopefully unlock some further capital. Which brings us to the role of the Sunfunder as a financial intermediary, and their role in dealing with a mismatch in the risk-return characteristics of investments in terms of the needs of the investors and what's available in the market, developing pipeline, aggregating projects and companies, and contributing to developing blended finance and working with DFIs, which brings us back to the first speaker, who clearly also mentioned a need for a role for DFIs in the space. I think the need for blended finance is clear. And then finally, perhaps the DRECs, which are an innovative instrument, another means to perhaps look at this issue and look at this problem and seeing how can we crowd in climate finance, how can crowd in additional sources of revenue streams for this sector from global corporations and climate investors. Apologies for the summary, I might not be comprehensive, but I think these are some of the key takeaway points. Thank you again to all the speakers for joining us today, and also for the members of the audience. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day or evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent panel. Thank you to all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.